Okay, so let's hear the numbers this time. What are you expecting for this hurricane season?
Yeah, we're forecasting an above normal Atlantic hurricane season this year. We're forecasting 19 named storms. Those are storms named by the National Hurricane Center. Of those 19, 9 becoming hurricanes, and of those 9, 4 becoming major Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricanes. Those are hurricanes with winds of 111 miles per hour or greater, and while they on average only make up about a quarter of all the storms named by the National Hurricane Center in a particular year, when you look at these storms historically, they've done about 80 to 85% of the hurricane-related damage. So they are generally the most impactful storms, although obviously you can still get significant impacts from a tropical storm. And just for reference, an average season has about 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes.
All right, and in your presentation, at one point you said here are 3 predictors, and you don't have to pick those 3 or whatever, but there's obviously support on why you expect that above average. So what's the reasoning? What's the sort of the big points on why you think it's going to be above average?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we really focus on. One thing that we focus on with all of our seasonal forecasts is, are we going to see El Nino or not? And we don't anticipate El Nino this summer and fall. El Nino is warmer than normal water in the central and eastern tropical Pacific, and that was one of the first predictors that Dr. Bill Gray discovered when he started doing these seasonal predictions out of Colorado State all the way back in 1984. When you had El Nino in the Pacific Ocean, you tend to overall get fewer hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean, and so he figured out it was basically through what happens at higher up in the atmosphere at, say, 20 to 30,000 feet. When you have an El Nino, it tends to make the west winds out of the west blow stronger up there, and that tends to tear apart hurricanes as they're trying to develop and to intensify. Another big factor that we look at every year is obviously what's going on in the Atlantic Ocean. Right now in the tropical Atlantic, so basically we're off the coast of Africa all the way to the Leeward and Windward Islands, water temperatures on average are basically near average. Not much warmer, not much colder, whereas they're a lot warmer than normal further north, so in the subtropical Atlantic, and especially when they're warm in the eastern part of the subtropical Atlantic, so off of the west coast of Portugal, that tends to be associated with them forcing lower atmospheric pressures, and that tends to cause weaker winds blowing across the tropical Atlantic. And kind of like when you get out of a swimming pool on a windy day, you get a lot of evaporation, you get cold in a hurry. When you have a lot of evaporation and a lot of churning up of the ocean surface, that tends to cause cooling of the ocean surface, whereas when the winds are weaker, that tends to cause warming. So we anticipate that during the lead up to the hurricane season, we're going to see the tropical Atlantic warm up a little bit faster than normal.
And I don't know how much you really touched on this with your presentation, but it seems to be a talker, at least. And so I'm going to have you have a chance to talk on it. And that are these early storms that we've been seeing. So the concept, or I don't know if you really include that in your forecast, but will we, or do you, what's your thoughts on when we see storms before June 1st?
Yeah, so we have seen storms, I believe, every year since 2015 prior to June 1st. All these have been tropical storms. None have reached hurricane strength. We haven't actually had an observed hurricane in May since all the way back to 1970. So it's been a long time since we've actually had a full-blown hurricane in May. But these weaker storms, even early on in the season, they often form right off the U.S. East Coast, so they can still cause potentially significant impacts. Obviously, for the Houston metro area, Tropical Storm Allison wasn't in May, but it was in early June, and obviously it was a devastating storm. Even though it wasn't very strong, it was obviously very slow-moving and brought a tremendous amount of rainfall to southeast Texas. So, there's certainly these early season storms can still be impactful. There is actually some discussion right now about whether they should move the hurricane season earlier, potentially back to May 15th. I know there's a lot of ongoing discussion on that topic. I'm guessing we'll get an answer, yes or no, on that in a couple of years.
Yeah, sure. And then you talked about El Nino and what that means for hurricane season, but in Houston it seems like we hear La Nina quite a bit. So I'm going to throw a question at you and let you use both terms and sort of do a little comparison or however you want to say those. But I'm used to hearing La Nina as opposed to not El Nino. So just talk about the comparison of those two cycles.
Yeah, so El Nino is warmer than normal water in the eastern and central tropical Pacific. La Nina is basically the opposite. It's colder than normal water there. And then you can have basically what's known as neutral, which is either El Nino nor La Nina, which where the water is really close to average. And so for Atlantic hurricane seasons, if you have a robust El Nino, so if the El Nino is generally fairly strong, that really knocks down the hurricane season. The odds of a busy season go way, way down. Whereas if you have either neutral conditions or La Nina conditions, you can still either way end up with a very busy hurricane season. It's a lot more dependent on what's going on in the Atlantic. But as long as you don't have an El Nino, usually your seasons can potentially be quite busy. It's not a guarantee. If you don't have if you don't have El Nino, it doesn't guarantee you will have a busy season. There's a lot of other factors that go into it as well.
Okay, and this is more just sort of a general question, more about you. I'd be perfectly honest, and that is, how did a kid from the Northeast who watched snow more than tropical weather end up being the leading expert of seasonal forecasts in Colorado State University?
Well, so I grew up in Massachusetts, so I grew up in Plymouth, so right on the water. So we did actually have a couple of hurricanes go through, not as often as you get them, say, in Houston, but when I was 5, Hurricane Gloria went through, made landfall actually in Connecticut, but still brought some fairly significant impacts to Massachusetts. So that really started getting me interested in hurricanes. And then we had Hurricane Bob go through in 1991. And that also brought pretty significant impacts. We were going to go to the Marshfield Fair that day, and when the hurricane came through, no Marshfield Fair. No fair, no fried dough for me. So that's really kind of what got me more interested in tropical meteorology. And so Colorado State, obviously, Colorado is nowhere near where hurricanes are, but the guy who started our department, his name was Herbert Reel. He was a big tropical meteorologist, and he actually came from the University of Chicago, which is still nowhere near hurricanes, but he came from Illinois, came to Colorado to start the department, and then Dr. Bill Gray was finishing off his PhD. Well, at that point he wasn't doctor, but he was about to become doctor. Bill Gray finishing off his PhD at the time, and so Reel invited Gray to come out to the university, and Gray was studying hurricanes. So the department has always had a hurricane bent. I mean, obviously we do a ton of stuff. Hurricanes are only one of many things that our department does, but we've always had a group, one or more groups studying hurricanes, and so hopefully we'll be able to continue that hurricane forecasting for many years to come. This is our 39th year of doing seasonal forecasts.
Okay, good. And I got 2 questions left. I know we're getting close on time. But the second to last question is, there's an argument that you don't even really need, an average person doesn't even really need to pay attention to a seasonal forecast because they need to be ready no matter what. So why do you make a seasonal forecast?
Yeah, and so I think, to the general public, yes, it's more an informational tool. People are curious. They want to know how active the season is going to be. But in terms of what actionable content is there on a seasonal forecast for the general public? Really not a lot. I mean, you need to be prepared the same every hurricane season. While more active seasons do have more landfalling hurricanes in general, you can certainly still be significantly impacted in a quiet season. Alternatively, you can have a crazy busy season. Great example of that is 2010. There were 12 hurricanes in the Atlantic, one of the most active years on record, and we had no hurricanes hit the U.S.
Yeah. Okay, and final question. What's next for you and your updates? So give us just what's coming and when.
Yeah, so our next update will come on June the 2nd, and then we'll update it again in early July and early August. And while August 1st is 2 months into the hurricane season, officially starts on June 1st, over 95% of your major hurricanes occur after the 1st of August. So it's important to realize while the hurricane season starts June 1st, often June and July are fairly quiet. So just because they were to August 1st and not much has happened doesn't guarantee that it's going to be a quiet season. For example, 2004, which was an extremely busy year, we didn't get our first named storm until August 1st that year.
Yeah. Good. Anything else you want to add?
I think that's about it.
Okay. Awesome. You nailed it. Perfect. Thank you. All right.